himself his first time to Alexandria, and it is quite an interesting and another harrowing episode turnout that we've seen similarly in episode 1, but not as harrowing as episode 1. But let's get into it. So Negan arrives at the gates of Alexandria, banging his bat against the gate, saying, little pig, let me in." And this is an allusion to the Three Little Pigs, obviously, but it's more closely an allusion to the comics. One of the first time Negan arrives, he delivers that line. And then Rick arrives at the gate, and one thing that we noticed throughout this episode is that it's more it's more Rick and Negan centric episode, where it's has an emphasis on their relationship and Rick's slight antipathy, that he's concealing, but it's a little bit, conspicuous when he's looking at Negan and shit. So it's very reassuring for an audience member to see that Rick isn't completely beaten into submission as we saw in episode 1. But yeah, we see Rick. So yeah, we see Rick arrive at the gates to let Negan in. He's looking at him with an expression of contempt. This guy does not deserve my respect or consideration, but he kind of has to conceal it, because if he reveals it, in a way that's just too obvious or conspicuous, then Negan is going to latch onto that, and he's going to see, Rick still has that glimpse of defiance in him. I need to break him even more, and he might kill someone else. So Rick is very cunning in that aspect. Now, I don't necessarily think that we'll see Rick right away say, because after the first visit, Jesus is there, and he says, go chase after Negan and keep me updated on where he lives, so that way we can, align a cunning attack. It's going to be a while, and this is why. When Negan arrives at the Alexandria, they're bantering and everything, and we get a gauge on more of Negan's banter dialogue, long monologues that we've seen taken from the comic book source material, and so I like it because it does have fidelity, and it's emulating a great work of art by Robert Kirkman. But then again, it gets a bit derivative from time to time, and I feel like they need to create something new, have some novelty to it. But for the most part, I do enjoy the dialogue that Negan has. But while they're there, Negan mentions, Maggie, man, I bashed her husband's brains in, but you know what? I still have a way with ladies. I think she'll still like me. And Seth Gillian's character, Father Gabriel, explains to Negan that she died on their way back, and he perpetuated this whole, we fabricated this whole story that Maggie died, and he even built a fake grave. And good on him, because that would have been bad if he took Maggie back to the sanctuary to be one of his wives or sex slaves or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that would have been pretty terrible. But what ends up happening is that we see a plotting progression throughout the episode. This episode's an hour and 24 minutes. And again, one of the things that has become a chronic issue or discrepancy with the Walking Dead TV show is that they're prolonged commercials that are just a bit excessive at times. I feel like we're getting more commercial than the actual plot of a show. And that's probably one of my many complaints about this episode. And whenever an episode is an hour and a half, it seems like you're getting more commercials than narrative. But anyway, aside from that, Carl ends up, you hear gunfire, and Rick and Negan go over to the area, and basically Carl, being a reckless and prudent child, is pointing the gun at one of the saviors, telling them, do not take all the medication. And this ends up with the cost and consequence of Negan taking all of their weapons, stripping them and depriving them of all their weapons to fight walkers or even, to lead a rebellion. And this is one thing that is significantly different from the comic book, where Robert Kirkman never had Negan's character, deprive them of weapons. And that's probably why Rick rebelled so quickly. But probably on the show, we're gonna see it's probably gonna be a while till we see Rick lead a rebellion, because they're deprived of any weapons, and they took a shit ton of weapons, as Negan states in the episode, a shit ton. So yeah, so they're stripped for all their weapons, and that was a little disappointing. And we see a shot from the Comic-Con trailer later in the episode where even Negan mentions one of the mirroring dialogue lines from Robert Kirkman's comic book, where he says, "You let the fat lady take care of all your rations, Rick." And that's when Olivia is leading some of the Saviors to take the weapons. And he delivers that line, and Rick still has a glimmer of defiance, which I'm excited about, because I was afraid he was going to be completely subdued. And it's terrible throughout the episode to see all these characters who are so audacious and tenacious, and ironically, they're so subdued and imprisoned under Negan's subjugation. It's terrible to see this. But yeah, so Olivia takes them to go take the weapons, and Negan, one of Negan's culprits, realizes that there's 2 pistols missing, and then Rick literally goes through all the houses of Alexandria and many others, flip the houses upside down to try to find these 2 weapons. And basically, Negan threatens, if you can't find the guns, then I'm gonna kill Olivia, and Olivia's life is at risk, potentially. So they find the guns in Spencer's home, and that ends up being not so good for Spencer later in the episode. I'll get into one of my favorite dialogue lines delivered from Rick. But yeah, they find the guns, they give them to Negan, and really, this episode is just about Negan displaying ostentatiously his control over everybody, and he might be going a little overboard. He's a little overzealous about his power he has over everybody, because when you enforce oppressive rule in a cruel manner over a lot of people, that's probably going to provoke them or give them incentive to, want to kill you. And we see Rick on that breaking point throughout the episode, where he's gripping Negan's baseball bat, seemingly about to go swing it at him or kill him. And he has to come back to reality and realize that that would not be prudent or sensible whatsoever, because he would end up dying from the Saviors. We also get to see what the Saviors are like, and most of them are very terrible, malevolent characters. We see Eden encounter one of them. This guy took her balloons, and she's like, "Give me my balloons back." And he says, "Say please," but he says it lasciviously. He has an overt sexual desire, and he's very suspiciously a pedophile, probably a rapist, because he says "say please," but he says it in a way that's like lewd, like he wants to hear her say it, and she's a child and he's an adult. We see what kind of the awful people that are soldiers under Negan's rule, and it's interesting to see a gauge on that. We haven't seen it really in the comics so much, but yeah, they really knock you over the head with that in this episode. So there's also a subplot in the episode with Rosita and Spencer where they go out and find Daryl's bike, orders delivered from Dwight. And you know what? Throughout this episode, I just lost all sympathy for Dwight in this episode. You feel a bit of sympathy with his story on being under Negan's oppression, the last episode, but he is just a total dick. Really just a callous asshole to specifically Rosita, where he tells her, "You're gonna go get my bike," and he takes her gun and even takes her water bottle, and like pours the water in front of her on the ground. And yeah, they have to go find the bike, Daryl's bike, because obviously if you watch the last episode, Dwight's bike was pretty much tarnished. So yeah, so they come back with the bike, and it's quite a funny exchange between Rosita and Dwight, because Dwight's like, "Thanks for getting my bike. Now you can have your hat back," because he takes her hat too. And then Dwight's like, "Did you find anything else?" And then Rosita's like, "No, just a couple of your dead friends." And I'm just like, damn, savage. I love that line delivered by Rosita. But yeah, then they leave inevitably, and before Negan leaves, he delivers that line where he says, "Thanks for taking care of Lucille. By the way, if you haven't noticed, I just slid my dick down your throat, and you thanked me for it." That is a line, also a mirroring dialogue line from the Walking Dead comic book, where he delivers that to Rick. Um, yeah, I enjoy hearing that. I bet Rick didn't. He was probably PO'd, but yeah, that was a mirroring. As I'm watching the show more and more, more episodes are kind of matching the fidelity for the source material, and I like the narrative and dialogue. Synonymously, I've been following the comics, and I like it, but sometimes create something new. Stop making it more derivative and make it more. Have implement more novelty into the narratives. So they eventually leave, and when they leave, Spencer gets back, and Rick confronts Spencer about the whole ordeal with the guns. And Spencer said, he's kind of defiant towards Rick, saying, "We should have made a deal with them when they could." And here's my whole deal on it. Really, the Saviors would have pillaged regardless. This was inevitable. And Rick's preemptive strike on one of the compounds was actually quite prudent and sensible to do, because let's stop the oppression from happening before they even get here. So let's kill them. And that was quite smart, although it didn't quite work out for Rick in the end, because he was unaware and unbeknownst to him the formidable size of Negan's army, and the fact that he could not handle such an insurmountable size of his army. And it's kind of a shame. But continuing on, Spencer basically says, he delivers a very callous line where he says, "You know what? Glenn and Abraham, they're great now because of Negan, because of what you've done." Then Rick, while he's walking off, he stops in his tracks and he says, "You say anything like that again, I'll break your jaw. I'll knock your teeth out." And I was just like, damn, vicious, ruthless Rick. I love that dialogue line by Rick. I mean, to be honest, I believe Spencer completely deserved it. That was a very insensitive thing to say. But yeah, then they go back and they take most of their mattresses too. They don't take any of their food, but they take most of their mattresses, and Rick is forced to sleep on the ground. And Michonne throughout the episode tries to be this motivator, try to give Rick incentive to do something, but Rick just he kind of throws his hands up in defeat, and believes that there's nothing to be done. He has a cynical viewpoint of defeating the Saviors, mainly because I want to call it cynical, mainly like cynical in a realistic manner, because there's no way they can handle the Saviors. They're just too much of a formidable force, and it couldn't be done. But by the end of the episode, we see Rosita confront Eugene, and she finds one of these bullets on the ground, and she confronts Eugene and says, "Can you make me one of these?" And then that's kind of foreshadowing an event in the comics where Eugene starts making ammunition for Rick's group to make more bullets. And it's actually Rick who confronts him, not Rosita in the comics. But that isn't really going to work out, mainly because they took all their guns, but Rosita had one. She hid one without anybody else's consent, so she has it like it's secret to herself, and Spencer as well. But she has one gun. They basically only have one gun, and she wants Eugene to make bullets. But yeah, that's really where the episode ends. Next episode, we will see where what the Saviors are up to. But this episode I really enjoyed. It had the fidelity for one of the issues in the 100s of The Walking Dead, their first arrival at Alexandria. One of my problems, though, is that the episode was quite plotting at times. It was very plotted. Yeah, and then the chronic problem with The Walking Dead, with the commercials being so prolonged. It feels like you're getting more commercial than the actual narrative. I swear to God, those commercials are like 5 minutes long per intermission, and it's just insane. But yeah, that's really all I have to say. I